Hi, I'm Steven Slate, and in this video I'm going to show you some really great techniques to make your drum tracks shine using the Slate Digital analog modeled plugins. Let's begin. So first I'm going to play you the dry drum tracks. Then I'm going to play the drum tracks processed in 3 different ways: ambient, natural, and tight. And I'll show you how to achieve each one of those sounds. Here we go. So let's take a listen to all of the mics. We'll start off with kick sub. Then the inside kick mic. Snare. Snare bottom. Hi-hat. So the toms have some mute automation. We'll skip those, but we'll get back to them. Here's the mono room mic. Overheads. Stereo room ribbon mics. Okay, so what we have is a nice recorded drum kit. It's in a small kind of medium room, and what we're going to try to do today is make it sound big, slightly ambient and polished. But of course we can play around with the ambience, and that's something that you can tailor to the needs of the mix. But let's start off. And what we're going to do is a top-down method. I'll explain what that means. Now, I have all of the drums routed to this stereo drum aux. So everything's going to this drum aux, and we're going to put VMR up here. And the first thing I'm going to do is process the entire drum mix and just kind of tone shape it a little bit. I'm doing that just with the VMR's FGN EQ. And all it's doing is adding a little bit of high shelf, a little bit of upper mids, and a little bit of lows. Just that alone, let's take a listen. Okay, so that's already setting a nice stage there. It's going to add a little more clarity, a little more punch. It's going to clean up things a bit, just going through that processor. It's really nice. Now here is my absolute necessity for any drum bus, and it's the VBC FG Gray. So I've got that on the entire drum mix. And again, we're starting off with that because, again, we're setting our stage. Everything goes through this drum bus, so we want to process it first. The settings I have in the FG Gray are ratio 4, we have attack at 10, release point 3, and we are only compressing just a little bit. Let's take a listen. So, I mean, just that little 3 dB of compression is adding so much definition and tightness, and it's gluing the bottom. So, again, we start off with that. That's already going to give us a little bit of a boost. So, again, top-down method. What's the next thing is going to be these stereo room mics. So, I'll show you what we're doing here. So, we've got the FGS EQ, and we're taking a little bit of high shelf down. We're adding a little bit of extra upper mid-range. We're scooping out, let's see, we're scooping out about 600 hertz. So we're kind of cleaning up a little bit of the boxiness. And then we have the high pass filter taking a little bit of the low rumble away. And that's at 110 hertz. Now the reason we're doing that is because that's going to tighten up the low end and allow the close mic of the kick to really punch through. And then, of course, we're going to the FG 116 limiter. So this is an interesting setting I have here. I've got 20-to-1, the fastest attack and release, which is going to be very aggressive. But then I backed off the mix to about 62% here. So let's take a listen to this. I'm going to actually solo it for you. So let's solo these room mics and put the VMR on it. So let's take a listen. So that's adding a lot of bigness. It's really taking those room mics, which, again, this room isn't particularly big, but it's making it sound quite a bit bigger, a little more exciting. So let's hear that in context of the whole mix so far. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Next thing is we'll do the overheads. Overheads, I've got the FGS. Not doing much, just, carving on a little bit of that, mid-range, that low mid-range. We're at 573 here, so we're taking a bit of that out. And then we're going to the FG401 VCA compressor. We've got 2.5 to 1, slightly low ratio, and kind of a medium attack and medium release here. We're on circuit 2, which is going to be a bit smoother. The transformer is in. What are we trying to do with this? We're just trying to smooth it out, level it out. Let's take a listen. So not a lot of processing on our overheads. You'll also notice the compression is mostly just triggering, the kick and snare. We don't really want to clobber it. We don't want to make the cymbal sound over-compressed. Just a little bit of a light touch there. Next we'll go to the mono overhead, and we'll listen to that without processing first. You can see I have it pretty low in the mix. And what are we doing here? We're putting the FGN on, boosting some mids. Let's take a listen just to that. And then we've got the 116, giving it some serious compression here. Fastest release, slowest attack, mix 100%. I'll make it a bit louder so you can hear what it's doing. Pretty brutal. All right, so let's hear all that in context. So that's going to be our stereo room mics, our overhead, and our mono room mic. And then we'll play a bit of Where We Began just for comparison. Okay, so let's start talking about our close mics. So I've got VMR on the kick sub, but I'll skip it because I'm not doing anything to it. But just in case, we'll keep the VMR there. But here is our close mic kick. Again, it started off sounding like this. Not bad, but let's give it some tweaks here. First processor on the VMR that I have is the FGN. It's giving it a little bit of mid-range and a little bit of lows. In fact, let's bypass the other processors and just hear what that's doing. So that's off. That's on. Again, not too much, but it's giving it a nice little mid-focus and a little bit of low focus. Next is the FG401 compressor. We've got a slow to medium attack. A fairly fast release, 4 to 1, and we've got circuit 1. However, we're bringing down the mix all the way to about 26%. So what are we trying to do with this? We're trying to add a little bit of sustain, maybe add a little bit of punch, just get it a little bit bigger sounding. So let's put that on and take a listen. Here it is at 100%. So you can see it's going to be crushed if you don't do that parallel compression. But we're just mixing in the dry signal and that compression. So we'll bring it back down to 26%. There, it's off. So it sounds just a little bit smaller. It's a little bit, more insignificant without that compression. Okay, next processor, one of my favorites, Revival. And it's just going to be adding a little bit of the thickness parameter, which is going to do exactly what it says there. It's going to thicken it up. Let's hear it. Love that. Last is the FGS doing some final carving. So we're going to add a little top. We're going to add, a good amount of mids here. We're adding about 3 kilohertz. We're scooping up a tiny bit of 300 hertz, and that's it. So let's take a listen to that. There it is. We just brought the fader up a bit. Let's take a listen to that in context. So we are getting somewhere. Let's go to the snare. I've got two processors on the snare. The first is the VMR, and we have the FGN adding a little bit of top, some upper mids, taken out a little bit at 600 hertz. You can tell that's a frequency that in this particular kit is a little bit overbearing. And then we're adding some lows at about 84 hertz. This is all with the FGN. We're doing something similar that we did to the kick with the snare in terms of the FG401. We've got 4-to-1, slowish attack, fast release, but we're putting the mix back to 50%. And then, of course, we got the revival adding a little bit of thickness and also the shimmer parameter. So let's hear it bypass again first. And then let's put it in. And bypass again. And back in. Next one we have is the virtual tape machine. And I've got it on the 2-inch 16-track, 456 tape, of course 15 nips, which I love. This is going to add a little bit more saturation to the transient, a little more vibe, a little more fatness, and a little more life. I love this on snare. Here it is. Ooh. I really love that. Okay, so that's great. We'll go to our bottom snare mic. Very simple. Just cranking a little top to get a little more sizzle out of it. We'll do a quick before and after here. Before, after. Nothing too crazy. Here it is with the top mic. Okay. Hi-hat, again, pretty simple stuff. I'll solo it for you. We have the FGS. We're taking just a tiny bit of top off with the high shelf. We're taking a little bit of that, 7K area, which kind of gets a little overbearing. We're back down to the low mids, or actually more of the mid-range here, knocking a little bit of 900 out. And then a little attenuation on the very low shelf. So we're attenuating a bunch of frequencies, kind of getting a little bit of the ugliness out of it. Here it is first, bypassed. And then in. And we'll bring it down the mix because we'll have a lot of that from our overheads in our rooms. But, the EQ will just kind of help it sit a little bit better. Okay, let's move to the toms. First thing I'll do is I'll solo this high tom, and we'll take a listen without any processing. So it's kind of nasal sounding, and that's what we wanted to fix with the processing. So here's the virtual mix rack. We have the FGS. We cranked a bunch of 6.5, 7 kilohertz here with a pretty wide bandwidth. Okay, that's going to bring up more frequencies there. So we have a pretty wide bell filter there. But then we scooped out a whole bunch of, again, that 560, 600 hertz area. We scooped a lot of it out, almost 9 dB. And then we added a bunch of low shelf. We started at about 130 hertz, and we cranked about 6.83 gain of low shelf. Then we went to revival, which is awesome on toms, and we added some thickness and some shimmer. So let's bypass this, then we're going to bypass the processor. So first I'll unbypass the EQ, then I'll unbypass revival. Here we go. Much better, I think. Much smoother, has a really, kind of takes that ugly nasal frequency out, has a lot of nice low-end punch. So that's pretty much what we've done to the other toms here, the mid-tom, the low tom. We'll take a listen to the kit now. And here again is where we started from. So this is a really nice natural sounding kit. This would work in a lot of material. But let's, keep going and see where we can take this. Let's try to add a few more tricks. And the first trick I'm going to show you is kind of what I call like the faux space trick. It's going to add some bigness, some depth, and it's pretty simple to do. What you're going to do is you're going to send your tracks to a stereo aux here. We're going to call it faux space. And I'll show you the processors we have on here. The first thing you're going to do is add a stereo delay. So we're just using the standard Pro Tools delay here. And I've got 30 milliseconds on one side and 40 milliseconds on the other. And we're just going to take a listen to what that sounds like. I'm going to solo it here. So again, I have a bunch of the drum tracks. I have the overhead sent to it, the room mics, the toms. You can send the snare and kick to it. You know, you can send anything you want to it. So that, again, 30 milliseconds, 40 milliseconds. Then what I'm going to do, the next processor I'm sending it to is a reverb. We've just got the standard Pro Tools Deverb here. We've got it on room and medium, and we've got 30% wet with an 854 millisecond decay. So now it sounds like this. This is where it started. And we've got this now. Now, because we have 30 milliseconds on one side and 40 on the other, it's going to sound more left heavy. So we can cheat that by taking our left panner and moving it to about, 9 o'clock there. So take a listen. So just a reminder, we have 30 milliseconds, we've got 40 milliseconds. We have that going into a reverb at about 30% wet. You want to keep about a 854 millisecond decay. You can kind of play around with that depending on how big you want it. Then we're going to go to VMR, and we are going to scoop out some lows with a high pass filter. We've got this one at 115. And then we're going to go to the FG116, pretty powerful setting. We've got the fastest release, which is always going to be aggressive, a medium attack, and let's take a listen to that. So that's pretty big, I would say. And we're going to slowly mix that into the kit. So listen to what that does. So it's a pretty cool trick because you can't really hear it working. You just hear this kind of space and bigness happen without it sounding too overbearing. So that's a cool trick. The next trick I'm going to show you is a snare mult. I call it snare force. So what we're doing is we're sending just the snare track to a aux, and I have trigger on the aux, but it's not actually triggering a sample. I'm just using the gate on trigger. You can also use another gate if you have a nice tight gate, but trigger's gate works so well. So let's just hear what it's doing. Okay, pretty standard, just gating out the sound, keeping a little bit of the sustain. But then we're going to go to the VMR, and we're going to be pretty aggressive with it. We've got the FGS, we've got a lot of top end, we have the widest bandwidth for the upper mid-range, we're slamming a whole bunch of 1.2K, and check this out, we've got the whole entire low shelf starting at 330 hertz, and we've cranked it all the way. We have the FG401 at 4:1, slow attack, fast release. It's given a little bit of compression, and then we've got thickness on revival, cranking some of the low-end energy. So let's take a listen to that. And before. And there's after. So I call that snare force, and I'm going to mix that in with the, more dry snare, and that's going to add a little more impact. So it's gated, so it's not going to have, all the other leakage that's going to be impacted by it, but it's going to really push some of that mid-range, push some of that punch. So let's hear that in the mix. and then off, on. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to start to talk about some samples. So I'm going to add two different kinds of samples. The first is I'm going to add it to the snare. But the snare already sounds really punchy and big. We don't really need much of a close mic sample. But what I want to do is make this kit sound like it was recorded in a much bigger space. So we have trigger on a aux that the snare is being sent to. And I chose the snare 20A room mic here. This is the room mic. And then here's the 20A Z1 mic. And it's kind of a smashed, overcompressed sample. Let's take a listen just to that. And you're going to notice that I chose a sample with a lot of ring. I love to mix a nice ringy snare sample in because it adds a lot of depth. You're not going to hear all that ring too much, up front in the mix, but what you'll hear is the depth of that, and you'll hear the depth of the room. So that's the snare sample. And the first thing I'll do is I'll just solo all the snare mics. So we have the snare top, snare bottom, snare fourth, and then that kind of ringy, roomy sample. And then I'll play it with the whole kit. And this is where we started. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a kick sample. I like what the kick is doing now, but I want something a little bit smackier and a little bit more consistent. So I've sent kick to a stereo aux, and now we actually do have a nice close mic. I'm using kick 1, which is kind of a nice standard sounding rock kick. And I have kick 1 and kick 1's NRG room mic. So let's take a listen to this sample. So you can hear some close mic, you can hear a little room mic, some depth, and what I'll do is I'll get a blend going with the dry kicks here, or the natural kicks, and we'll unsolo it and take a listen. So there you go. I like the sound of this kit now. I think it's a very modern rock sound. It's got some ambience to it. Again, you can kind of kill these samples. It doesn't actually really need them. Here's what happens when we kill the samples. And here's what happens when we kill the FAUX space. So this is just the mics without that little trick. And that sounds really cool too. That's a drier, more immediate sound. So depending on, what type of mix you have or what type of song, either one of those options would work. So that is processing some acoustic drum tracks with the Slate Digital plugins. And stay tuned for more great tutorials. Thanks for watching.